she asked once, as softly as she could, and Harper's answer fell between them like a blade. It already happened yesterday, without you. The words lived in the apartment after Harper left, climbing the walls and settling in the quiet corners, turning the clocks ticking into something hollow. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding, and found out too late that there had been a ceremony she had not been invited to. The hallway still smelled faintly of rain and the citrus cleaner Lydia used on Saturdays. She stood there with her hand on the doorframe, feeling the grain of the wood under her fingertips, and counted the years since she had first tied her son's shoelaces, since she had brought home a paper crown from his 9th birthday, since she had sat through recitals and school plays and colds and late-night whispers about the stars. The years were not a shield. They were only years. She made coffee because that was what her hands knew how to do, and the kettle small has steadied her. She tried to imagine it, the yesterday that had happened without her, a courthouse room perhaps, a short vow, a pen scratching across paper, a ring. She had kept her mother's ring wrapped in felt in the top drawer of the dresser for 21 years and had imagined, not insistently but with a tender, private hope, that she would place it on the palm of the girl her son loved, that she would say something about the women who had worn it before. When Daniel began dating Harper, when the laughter started filling his calls, when he said her name as if tasting a new word, Lydia had taken the ring out on a Sunday and held it in her hand for a minute. She had imagined its weight on another woman's finger and had put it back and told herself not to hurry anything along in her mind. Harper had smiled politely, at first. There had been dinners where they said careful things, warm but careful, and Lydia learned that Harper drank her tea without sugar and disliked cilantro and had a mother who opened a boutique the year she turned 9. Harper spoke about boundaries the way some people spoke about fitness routines or calendars. Lydia tried not to count the number of times Harper said the phrase, "We need our own space." She nodded and said she understood. She did understand. She had repeated to herself that letting go was the work of any decent parent. Still, when Lydia asked about the wedding date, she had imagined the smallest, simplest inclusion, a time and a place so she might press flowers into a book that night and sleep with the gentle ache of a day that had meant something. It already happened yesterday, without you. Harper had not blinked when she said it. Her tone had not been cruel, it had been clinical, like delivering a lab result, like listing an expense. There had been no Daniel at the door, no hand on Harper's shoulder, no apology. After Harper turned and walked down the hall, the elevator had made its soft mechanical sigh and swallowed her. Lydia carried her coffee cup to the small table by the window and stared at her phone. There were no messages from Daniel. At noon, she received a picture from a number she did not recognize, a co-worker of Daniel's who had, once, eaten lemon cake in Lydia's kitchen after a work party. No text, just the photo. It showed a white hallway, a potted plant that looked like it lived on fluorescent light and the patience of clerks, and 2 people with hands clasped. The angle was odd, as if the phone had been held low. Daniel's jawline was unmistakable. Harper's hair fell in elegant waves over one shoulder. On her left hand, Lydia recognized the glint. The ring. Her mother's ring. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding, and yesterday came back with proof. Lydia set the phone face down and let her breath out slowly. There had been no theft, months ago, when Daniel visited to help her carry a bookshelf up the stairs that they ended up laughing at because it was obviously designed for someone with 8 hands. He had asked if she still had the ring. "I thought maybe," he had said, looking at the cardboard instructions that made no sense, "I could just hold on to it. So I don't ask you last minute. So it's safe." He had smiled sheepishly. She had hesitated only a second, then gone to the dresser and brought it to him wrapped in felt, and he had held it like an oath. He had promised to bring it back if anything changed. "Nothing's going to change," he had said, and he had kissed her cheek. That night, Lydia did not sleep. She lay awake and watched light move across the ceiling as cars passed below her window. At 3:12 a.m., her phone vibrated. A voicemail from Daniel, 9 seconds long. His voice sounded raw. "Mom," he said. "I messed up." He breathed in like he was about to explain, but he didn't. The recording ended with silence. 2 days later, Harper stood in Lydia's doorway again, not with an invitation or an apology, but with a list. She spoke quickly, as if hurrying through a task. "We covered everything ourselves," she said, "and we decided it would be fair if you contributed. It's standard." She slipped a sheet of paper onto the table. Numbers marched down the page in tidy columns: courthouse fee, photographer, dress alterations, dinner, totals that ended in neat zeros. "And the honeymoon deposit," Harper said, tapping the bottom line. "It's refundable if we cancel, but we won't. So this is what we need from you this week." She looked around Lydia's small apartment as if evaluating it. "Honestly, it's not even that much." Lydia's fingers found the edge of the list and held it in place. The paper felt coarse. She had trained herself, over years, to count to 5 before saying anything unkind. "Why did you not invite me?" she asked, her voice quiet, "to the wedding?" It was not even a question anymore. It was a line drawn down the center of the room. Harper lifted one shoulder. "It was better this way," she said. Everything was calmer. "Your presence stresses Daniel. It derails him." "He said that." Her expression did not waver. "We needed it to be about us." Lydia felt the floor tilt slightly. "I stressed him?" She remembered Daniel's voicemail 2 nights before. He said he messed up. "Daniel regrets a lot of things," Harper said. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're focusing on moving forward. Look, this is about being adults. Contributions, respect. Boundaries. If you can't contribute, then just say so and we'll make note of it." It was the word note that made Lydia's body go cold. It broke into her mind in the sharp, paper-cut way of bureaucracy and permanent files. Make note of it. She pictured a ledger with her name written in the margins, a list of failures recorded in clean ink. "I won't be paying for a wedding I was not allowed to be present at," Lydia said, and the steadiness of her voice surprised her. "I would have given gifts. Love. I would have stood nearby and found joy in it. I won't be paying invoices to prove that I matter." Harper's smile was quick and thin. "You matter to Daniel insofar as you support him," she said, as if quoting a book on familial systems. "You have a history of making him feel guilty. We're reducing guilt." She stood. "You also still have that painting he did in high school. The one with the leaves? We want it for our living room. It's sentimental. You can drop it at our place. I'm sure you know the address." She did. It had been in the caption of a photo once, an apartment in a building with a lobby that smelled like eucalyptus. Lydia considered the painting, the paper a little warped where he had laid paint too thickly, the way the leaves looked like small flames, and an old panic rose in her, the panic of losing small anchors. "No," she said softly. "That was a gift to me. I'm keeping it." Harper examined her for a moment as if studying a specimen. "Fine," she said, as if granting a concession in a negotiation. "We'll manage without your help. But it's interesting." She picked up her bag. "It says a lot." She turned toward the door and then paused. "Also, it's time you understood that your place in our life will be defined by us. Not by your expectations." The smile again, practiced and precise. "Good day, Lydia." After she left, Lydia washed the coffee cup and the plate and set them on the rack to dry. Her hands shook so much that she had to hold the plate a second time. She took the list and folded it in half and half again and tucked it under the sugar tin. The apartment felt smaller than it had that morning. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding, and in the days that followed the daughter-in-law demanded money and spoke with arrogance, and a deeper conflict began to show itself like a bruise rising through skin. Lydia called Nora, her oldest friend, and told the story in a voice that barely sounded like her own. Nora listened without interrupting. "It wasn't about the ceremony," Nora said when Lydia finished. "It was about control. Harper wanted to mark territory. The money is a ledger. Not a need. I keep replaying it, Lydia said. Did I do something? Nora snorted softly. You raised a son who loved you and laughed in your kitchen. You didn't do it perfectly. No one did. But you didn't do this. This has a fingerprint. She paused. Have you talked to Daniel? He left a voicemail in the middle of the night, Lydia said. She repeated the 9 seconds. I think she stopped. Thinking made the air heavier. Then he's not lost to you, Nora said quietly. He's tied in knots. Someone is tightening them. That afternoon, Lydia did something she hadn't done since she was 25 and needed a copy of a birth certificate. She went to the courthouse. The clerk behind the bulletproof glass looked bored and kind. Lydia asked if she could confirm a marriage record. The clerk asked for names, tapped on a keyboard, then disappeared into a back room and returned with a thin printout. The date on the page was, indeed, yesterday. Lydia recognized the witness names. One was Harper's friend, the other was a man Lydia did not know, G. Ainsley, which sounded like the name of someone who wore cufflinks and watched auctions online. There was an officiant stamp and the corner of it bore a faded logo Lydia recognized from a stack of brochures in the lobby, a private notary service with a package that included a celebratory photograph. It had all been efficient, like a transaction planned between lunch meetings. On her way home she stopped by the park where she had once taught Daniel to ride a bike. She sat on the same bench near the elm trees and watched a little girl chase a bubble until it popped. She remembered how Daniel had fallen twice, scraped his knee, and then, angry, had shouted that gravity was unfair. He had stood up and tried again anyway, jaw set, the way he had done everything later, with a quiet, stubborn faith that things could be learned by doing them. She could not reconcile that boy with the man who had let Harper deliver news like a verdict and a demand like a bill. But human beings were not puzzles with corner pieces, they were weather, changing under pressure. The family group chat began to populate with messages by evening, not because Lydia posted but because bad news traveled without help. Daniel's cousin Alina wrote, I saw photos. Sorry, Aunt Lyd. Lydia's sister, Vera, who was blunt as a hammer and twice as protective, wrote, he married without his mother. Is he out of his mind? Then, 10 minutes later, do not text him when I'm this angry. Lydia stared at the screen and placed the phone face down. The next day, she saw the ring again. It was in a filtered photo on social media, Harper's hand lifted to show the diamond and the engraved band, the caption a paragraph about choosing ourselves and paring down to what matters and the ceremony we wanted, without noise. There were heart emojis. There were comments that said so healthy and boundaries queen. The ring shone like a small, captured star. Lydia read the caption twice and felt the slippery feeling of being accused without being named. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding and found herself reduced to noise in a paragraph about health. Dara insisted on coming over. She appeared with pastries and righteous fury and hugged Lydia so hard that Lydia had to swallow down a sob. I'll say what you won't, Dara said, setting the pastries on the table like ammunition. You were exiled. They built a tiny kingdom and put a wall around it. Now they want tribute. She stabbed a finger at the folded paper under the sugar tin as if she knew exactly where it was. Of course she asked for money. This is about receipts. It isn't only money, Lydia said. It's that she talked to me like I was an obstacle. Like I was a test to pass. Then don't be a test, Vera said. Be a fact. She looked at Lydia with a softened gaze. What do you want to do? Lydia said the first truth that rose. I want to understand how my son got so far from me that he believed this was the way to love her. Vera exhaled. Then ask the right questions. She poured tea. Start with who benefits when you're cast as the villain. Lydia slept a little that night. In the morning, she found an envelope under her door with her name written in Daniel's hand. Inside was a sheet torn from a small spiral-bound notebook. The writing was hurried. Mom, I'm sorry, it said. I thought it would be simpler. I thought we would do the big thing later and that you would forgive the small thing. It stopped being small. I didn't know what to do. I panicked. Please don't hate me. There was a coffee stain on the bottom corner, as if he had written it at a cafe with trembling hands. She sat on the edge of her bed with the note on her lap. She did not hate him. The word didn't fit. But there was a weight in her chest that did not lift easily. She placed the note next to a photograph of him at 4, holding a paper boat at the edge of a puddle. She decided to call Harper's mother. It was not a plan she admired in herself, but she wanted to understand what architecture had held that yesterday in place without her. Harper's mother, Vivian, answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm the way a salesperson's was warm, trained, pitched, pleasant. "Lydia," she said. "Congratulations to us both, I suppose." Lydia restrained the impulse to answer with heat. "It seems you were at the ceremony," she said. "I wasn't." "I wondered why." Vivian sighed sympathetically, the sound a performance of empathy. "Darling, these things get complicated. You know how emotions can overshadow special days." The kids wanted minimal fuss. Minimal conflict. These modern kids, they like, how do they put it, low stakes. She chuckled. "Besides, there will be a party later. You'll be there for that." Lydia closed her eyes. "Low stakes," she repeated. "For whom?" "I asked Harper about the date of the wedding because I had imagined standing in a room where my son signed his name. I was told it happened yesterday, without me. I'm trying to understand who decided I was a stake to be removed." There was a pause. When Vivian spoke again, her tone had changed, it had a trace of steel. "Harper has worked very hard to build a life where she isn't judged or micromanaged," she said. "I understand you have a close relationship with Daniel. That's lovely. But closeness can feel like pressure. Harper is not interested in inheriting pressure." She cleared her throat delicately. "And frankly, Lydia, the financial ask was modest. It's a way of demonstrating support. You could take the opportunity to start fresh." "By paying a bill for a celebration I wasn't allowed to attend," Lydia said. Her calm surprised her again. "Start fresh how? With a receipt?" "You're making this adversarial," Vivian said lightly, and Lydia heard the shift. She was being placed in a category again, the difficult mother, the obstacle. "Think of it as participation. Or don't. We'll all live." When Lydia hung up, she felt a strange quiet. She had expected fury to flood her, but what arrived was clarity, thin and sharp. The story being told about her had already been written somewhere, about control, about guilt, about pressure, and it had been rehearsed enough to sound smooth. She had been cast in it without her permission. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding and found that the answer had been prefaced by a narrative about her. The money was a test, but not of generosity. It was a test of whether she would accept the story. On Saturday, Lydia walked to Daniel's building. The doorman considered her for a second and then nodded, because he remembered the time 2 winters ago when she had brought hot chocolate to the lobby staff after a blizzard. And some people were not as complicated as others. She took the elevator to the 9th floor and stood in front of his door and knocked. She heard movement inside. The bolt slid. The door opened a fraction. Daniel's face appeared in the narrow space. He looked like a man who had been sleeping badly and thinking too much. His hair was messy. His eyes were rimmed with red. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Mom," he said, and one syllable carried a history. "I came to look at you," Lydia said, brutally honest. "To see if you're okay." She swallowed. "I can't fix anything today. I can only look at you." He opened the door wider. The apartment smelled like takeout and lemon dish soap. On the kitchen counter, there were 2 glasses, one with a lipstick ring. Harper's scarf lay draped over the back of a chair like a claim. Daniel gestured to the couch. He did not sit. He leaned against the wall and rubbed his hand over his face. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought it would be easier for her. For everyone." She said a big day would spiral, and he shook his head. I thought I could make it up later. I've always thought I could fix things later. There isn't a later for this, Lydia said gently. There is only what happened. It's done. She took a breath. She asked me for money. He looked at the floor. I told her not to, he said, then immediately followed it with, I didn't tell her strongly. He looked up. I'm ashamed. That's the truth. Shame is a poor compass, Lydia said. It points you in circles. She sat very still. Daniel, listen to me. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding and was told it already happened yesterday without her. Days later, the daughter-in-law demanded money and spoke with arrogance, revealing a deeper conflict that shattered the family bonds we had. That is not a sentence I ever thought I would live inside. But I am inside it. And so are you. So, how did you get here? He sat down then, as if the question had become too heavy to answer standing up. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was small. It didn't happen in a day, he said. It was little things. Phrases. Advice. The way I was corrected after calls with you. The way a joke became a criticism. The way I was praised for choosing us. The way I was told that you were choosing yourself when you asked for time. It made sense while it built itself. It was like standing in a room while someone moved the furniture an inch every night. Lydia exhaled as if something in her had recognized itself. And then? And then I wanted peace, he said. And I chose the quickest path to it. I thought peace would come from agreeing. It came with a price I didn't understand. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the 6-year-old who had once handed her a flower with dirty fingers and said he had picked it for her because it looked like sunshine. Mom, I'm sorry. He said it the way a person says I am thirsty, a need, not an argument. She nodded. I know, she said. She stood before she could cry. I'm leaving the door unlocked on my side. That's all I can promise. I won't pay for being locked out. She reached for her bag. And I won't disappear. The door across the hall opened then, and Harper stepped out, surprised to find them in the corridor. She held a bag of recycling in one hand. Her face emptied of warmth when she saw Lydia. She glanced at Daniel. I asked you to text me when you were done, she said to him, cool and light. To Lydia, she offered a smile that did not reach her eyes. We're in the middle of a day. Can you wrap this up, please? Daniel's spine straightened a fraction. He looked at Lydia and then at Harper. The pause held. The air changed, almost imperceptibly, as if some barometric pressure had shifted. I'm not wrapping my mother up, he said, and the sentence hung there, new. Harper's gaze flickered. A small line appeared between her eyebrows. I'm taking out the recycling, Harper said evenly, and then I'm going to be in our home, and we're going to talk about respectful time management. She brushed past Lydia without touching her and moved down the hall toward the trash chute. Her steps precise. 3 minutes, she said over her shoulder to Daniel, as if timing a sprint. Lydia did not look at Harper as she went by. She looked at her son. I'll go, she said. I've seen what I needed to see. She reached up and touched his cheek lightly, the way she had when he was small and feverish. Eat something real. Call me when there's quiet. She stepped into the elevator, and the doors closed on his face, pale and complicated, and on the scarf draped over the chair, and on the way the afternoon light fell across the floor like a grid. That evening, the family bonds tore invisible ways. Vera wrote a message to Daniel that was half love, half fury, and then deleted it and wrote again, calmer but unsparing. Lydia's cousin sent a long remembrance of their grandmother, of what the ring had meant to her, of the story it carried from Odessa to this city, and Lydia read it with tears she hadn't let herself shed earlier. Harper posted a story about protecting peace from old patterns, and comments rained down like applause. Lydia did not answer anyone. She sat by the window with the city's lights pricking on and held her mother's apron in her lap, the faded blue cloth soft from decades of wash. She closed her eyes and tried to measure time differently, not by events but by the people who endured inside them. At midnight, her phone buzzed with a different tone. A message from an unsaved number. "This is G. Ainsley. We met recently." Lydia blinked, realizing she had not met him at all, she had only seen his name. "I have information you may want regarding the wedding day. It is not about money." The next line contained a place and a time from earlier that afternoon, implying he had sent the message hours ago and it had been delayed, one of those technological shrugs. "Then, if you want to understand what she asked him to sign before the vows, I can explain." Lydia sat up, her heart dialed up a notch. She read the message again. Before the vows. She thought of the notary stamp, the private service, the speed. She thought of Harper's cool tone, of Vivian's trained warmth, of Daniel's 9-second apology at 3 in the morning. She imagined pages placed in front of a man whose compasses were spinning, simple signatures, initials on lines, agreements made in hunger for quiet. She typed back only 2 words. "I'm listening." Then she placed the phone on the table and felt the room tilt just enough to tell her a new fact had entered. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding and heard that it had already happened yesterday, without her. Days later, the daughter-in-law demanded money and spoke with arrogance, revealing a deeper conflict that had begun to pull at every thread of their family. Somewhere between a private signature and a public caption, a story about loyalty and power had been written. Lydia sat very still and thought about pens and pressure and how people agreed to things when they were tired. She looked at the folded note on the table written in her son's hand and understood that she had arrived at the edge of something that had not yet been named aloud. The night pressed against the window, steady and indifferent, and below, the city hummed as if nothing had shifted at all. Lydia picked up the phone, read G. Ainsley's message again, and traced the lines in her mind that joined the ring on Harper's finger, the list of expenses under the sugar tin, and a set of documents sliding across a table in a quiet office where a small camera took a celebratory photograph of the moment a man agreed to a kind of peace that did not look like peace at all. She sat there, awake, in the sentence she had never wanted to live inside, and she waited for the next truth to announce itself as clearly as Harper's first sentence had at her door. G. Ainsley asked to meet in a place with windows and witnesses, so Lydia chose the corner booth at Weaver's, a narrow diner that smelled like coffee and butter and remembered people by their orders. He arrived in a gray jacket that tried to look expensive and failed by a thread. He held himself like a man who had practiced being discreet. He slid into the seat across from her and kept his voice low, as if the salt shakers could report back to someone. He said his name was Graham. He said he worked for the notary service as a contractor, the person who shepherded clients through stacks of paper and made sure every page got an initial where an initial belonged. He said he had seen many couples sign many things. He said he had not seen many faces like Daniel's. Lydia wrapped her hands around her mug and told him she wanted only what belonged to her, words, not papers. Graham nodded as if relieved not to be asked for copies. There were 3 documents besides the license, he said. One was a marital financial management agreement. Not a full prenup, not the kind you get drafted by a firm, more like a template someone modified. It gave primary authority to your daughter-in-law over joint expenditures above a certain threshold and required that any direct gifts given to Daniel by family counted as marital contributions only if matched by an equivalent deposit from her into the same account. The language framed it as balance. "I think that's why she's asking you for money." It set up a ledger. He glanced out the window, then back. The second was a gift letter for the ring. A formal statement that your son gifted the ring solely and permanently to his spouse on the day before the ceremony, confirming that it wasn't a family trust piece. You probably knew that, but this made it legalese, in case anyone ever argued. Lydia's fingers tightened around the ceramic. She had expected something like that to exist now, hearing it said drained the color out of it. "And the third?" she asked. "A small power of attorney," he said. "Limited scope. It allowed her to act on his behalf for certain financial tasks while he was unavailable due to work. It wasn't sinister by itself. It was the timing and the pace. He tried to slow down, once. He lifted the pen and asked if he could call someone to review. She laughed, lightly, maybe not cruelly, and said, "We rehearsed this, babe. We're on a schedule." She pulled the next page toward him. He signed. I watched his face. He didn't look like a man protecting himself. He looked like a man climbing into a small box because the room felt loud. Lydia pictured a quiet office with fluorescent lights and a fake ficus plant. She pictured Daniel's hand, the way he had held a pencil as a child, pressed too hard at first, darkening the page. "Thank you," she said. She meant for the facts, but she also meant for the witness, for someone else having stood close enough to catch details she had no way to catch. "Why tell me?" Graham pushed the sugar caddy an inch, then pushed it back. "I've done this long enough to see patterns," he said. Some couples came in holding each other like a raft. Some came in like they were purchasing a quiet afternoon. This felt like a purchase. It wasn't my place to interfere. It also wasn't my conscience to ignore. He hesitated. There was also a clause in that management agreement that said they would avoid third-party emotional interference in financial decisions. It named no one. You felt named anyway. I could see that clause used as a stick. He left before his coffee cooled. He left a business card he said she didn't need, a tiny white rectangle with his name in clean font. Lydia sat in the booth after he was gone and watched the world move past the window. A bus exhaled at the curb. A woman in a yellow coat shepherded a child across the street. She thought about how a pen turned a day into law. She thought about the way a sentence could be drafted to sound like health and act like a door. She walked home slow. On her way, she passed the boutique that Vivian had once bragged about in a magazine profile, the kind of place where sweaters sat alone under spotlights and price tags hid under cloth. The door stood propped open for the afternoon foot traffic. Lydia stopped half a step beyond the threshold and looked in. Vivian stood near the back in a soft black dress, speaking to a woman about investment pieces in a tone that made cotton sound like inheritance. Vivian saw her, or sensed her presence, and in the space of a blink, her face put on concern the way other people put on scarves. She excused herself and came forward, palms out. "Lydia," she said, as if summoning a dear friend across a crowded room, as if they hadn't spoken on the phone with steel disguised as silk. "Are you shopping?" Lydia shook her head. "I learned today what he signed," she said. She kept her voice in the middle. "I learned about the ring letter. I learned about the ledger." Vivian smiled at a small, measurable thing, tightening, releasing. "Legal clarity reduces confusion," she said. "You'd be amazed how many families think sentiment outruns signatures." She gestured to a display of gloves, as if that were an example. "It sounds like you've been catching up on details. It sounds like your daughter has been writing a story in which I was the villain and the cashier," Lydia said. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding. The young woman replied, "It already happened yesterday, without you." Days later, the daughter-in-law demanded money and spoke to her with arrogance, revealing a deeper conflict that kept unfolding. "And you want me to call that health and clarity?" "I won't." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The words sat between them like a chess piece moved to the center of the board. For a second, Vivian's eyes showed something harder. Then the softness returned like a curtain lowered. "I can't control how you interpret choices," she said. "My daughter protects her peace. Your son protects his peace. You could protect yours by not keeping score." "I kept a photograph," Lydia said. "Of my son at 4. That's my score." She stepped back. "Have a good day, Vivian." She meant it, oddly, she meant it the way you wished a river a good day when you knew you wouldn't drink from it. At home, she placed Graham's card in a drawer she rarely used and called Nora. She repeated the facts. Nora listened the way some people hold hands, present, firm. "So she built a system where love looked like a receipt," Nora said. "And now she's asking you to prove you love him by paying one. I hate this century." She exhaled, a sound like a kettle settling. You can't rip the paper out of their hands. But you can stop pretending it's a love letter. I don't know what I can do, Lydia said. Not that changes anything, I mean. I can't even say fix. Fix belongs to things with screws. You can tell the truth with your eyes open, Nora said. You can draw your own lines, not the ones she handed you. You can be the person he knows when he remembers who taught him to ride a bike. That night, Daniel arrived without announcing himself. He looked thinner at the edges, as if sleep had eaten the extra off him. He stood in the doorway the way he had at 19 when he came home from a party too late and knew he needed to be honest before anyone asked. Lydia stepped aside. He came in, and the apartment adopted him the way a room remembers its furniture. He sat at the table and took out his phone. I went back, he said. I asked for copies. They gave me summaries. I signed things I pretended to understand. I told myself that I was doing the adult thing. I sounded like a TED talk inside my head. He swallowed. I read a clause 3 times today. It said any material gifts from enmeshing relatives, he looked up, apologizing already for the phrase, would be considered destabilizing and less balanced. She said that part was just language. She said lawyers liked big words. He made a small, helpless gesture. I believed her because it was easier. Lydia poured him soup and watched him eat half of it without tasting it. She asked for the painting, she said. The leaves. He stared at her, then looked at the wall where the painting hung, the reds and golds catching light that had traveled miles to land there. His face softened into something immediately, recognizably him. No, he said, almost childlike in the way he said it. That was mine to give. I gave it to you. He rubbed his forehead. She told me to ask for it. I said no. It sounds small. It mattered more than it should. It didn't sound small, Lydia said. It sounded like the thing it was. He nodded. He put his phone on the table and turned it face up. A text thread glowed. Lydia didn't read, but he slid it closer anyway, an offering of transparency. Sometimes she typed what I should say before I called you, he said. Sometimes I used her lines because they sounded like clean floors. Clean floors felt safer than messy truth. I'm ashamed. He pushed the phone back into his pocket like a hot coal. I know shame doesn't fix anything. I say it so you know I'm not explaining this to get free of the stain. Lydia reached across and touched the back of his hand. He did not pull away. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding. She heard, it already happened yesterday, without you. Days later, the daughter-in-law demanded money and spoke with arrogance, and it revealed a deeper conflict that began to shatter the bonds we had. That is a sentence with too many commas and not enough breath. But we breathed through it today. That counts. He nodded again, as if counting mattered. He stood and wandered to the painting and stood there a long time, his shoulders lifting and falling. She wants a brunch, he said. With you. With her mother. With me. To reframe. She said it would be good optics. She used that word like we were running for office. He glanced over. I told her I'd ask you. I didn't want to walk you into a room where you'd be outnumbered and then blame you for being quiet. I don't mind rooms, Lydia said. I mind lies. If we sat at a table, I would say true things. She would do what she does. You would watch. Maybe something would tilt. Maybe nothing would. Brunch ends either way. She smiled without humor. Eggs can only be scrambled so far. He barked a laugh that surprised him, then covered his face with his hand. I wanted my life to be simple, he said, the kind of confession that sounded like a wish. I picked the quickest path to quiet. It came with a loudness I didn't hear in time. The brunch took place 2 days later at a glass-walled restaurant that pretended to be casual and charged like a ceremony. Vivian arrived in something beige and expensive. Harper arrived on time, which felt like a performance, and kissed the air near Lydia's cheek the way people practiced in mirrors. The server brought water. The city glimmered beyond the windows as if unaware of humans and their small wars. Harper opened with a speech, light and polished. She talked about miscommunications and the narrative that hurt feelings, even when no harm was intended. She used the word boundaries like it had been copyrighted, she used the word healthy like a stamp. She did not apologize. When she finished, Vivian nodded as if someone had pitched a product. Lydia thanked the server for the coffee and let silence sit for a second. "I understood your choices," she said to Harper, and she meant it in a way Harper would never register. "You made a ceremony that felt manageable to you. You excluded me because my presence didn't fit that definition. Then you issued a bill so I could purchase a sense of inclusion after the fact. I declined. That refusal wasn't aggression. It was clarity." She looked at Daniel, and he held her gaze. "I learned what you signed. I learned why you asked me for money. I learned you built a ledger that kept score of love with numbers." Harper smiled like a glossy magazine. "This sounds theatrical," she said, amusement frosting the word. "We just asked you to contribute to your son's day. Most mothers would be grateful to be included in any way. We offered a clean slate. You could have said yes." "Being allowed to pay is not inclusion," Lydia said. "It's a toll." Vivian put down her fork with a small clink. "Let's not make this adversarial," she said, the refrain of her life. "We're here to build bridges." "Bridges don't come with invoices," Vera would have said, and Lydia felt her sister in her ear like a blessing. She kept her voice even. "Bridges come with handrails." "I haven't seen any." She turned to Daniel because the only conversation that mattered sat inside his eyes. "This is me, not a narrative written about me. I love you. I didn't like being written out and charged a fee to read the script." Harper's smile thinned. "We're not doing guilt," she said to Daniel, almost as if Lydia had vanished and she was speaking across her. "We agreed." Daniel put his napkin down. He didn't raise his voice. "We agreed to a ceremony," he said. "We did not agree to pretend my mother didn't exist." He looked at Harper the way you look at a horizon you finally named. "I asked you not to ask her for money." "You did. You said it was standard." "It wasn't standard. It was strategic." Harper's eyes flashed a quick brightness, a flare that came and went. "So now we're making me a villain at breakfast," she said lightly. "In front of your mother? This is exactly why we wanted a small ceremony. The drama." Lydia lifted her cup and let them hear only the porcelain touch the saucer. The sound was small and decisive. "Drama is what fills the space left by truth," she said. "We're trying truth." The server arrived with plates. Scrambled eggs settled like soft mountains. The conversation moved to cutlery for 3 breaths. Harper ate 2 bites and announced she had a call in 20 minutes that she had to take, something about a brand collaboration that had not been named until that second. Vivian murmured about time. Daniel stared at his plate as if reading a map. The brunch ended not with a scene but with an absence. Harper stood, kissed the air near Daniel's cheek, and said, "We'll align later." She left the table as if stepping off a set. Vivian lingered a beat, then followed, calling a soft goodbye over her shoulder that treated Lydia like a neighbor's dog, acknowledged, not seen. Daniel and Lydia remained, 2 people with forks and too much air. He walked her to the curb. The sun struck the buildings at an angle that made windows look like 1,000 small C's. "Thank you," he said, the words a complicated currency. "You didn't let me make it smaller than it was." "I also didn't make it bigger," she said. "I made it exact." He nodded. He looked like a man who had misplaced a key and found it in the pocket he checked first and somehow missed. He hugged her, quick and unguarded. When he stepped back, his phone buzzed. A message lit the screen, a few words visible before he swiped. "Boundaries require consequences." The name at the top was Harper's. He put the phone in his pocket without answering. He looked at Lydia as if he had walked out of a dark theater into daylight and his eyes needed time. "I'm coming by tonight," he said, then seemed to realize he had spoken a plan and corrected it to the truth. "I came by when it got quiet." He smiled a small, human smile that looked like the boy with the paper boat. "I ate soup." Lydia went home and did small things. She watered a plant that had been pretending to die and had rewarded her patience with 2 new leaves. She sorted a drawer that hadn't needed sorting for a year. She held the high school painting and remembered the day he had carried it in, the way he had stood back and tilted his head and said it wasn't the thing he had seen in his mind but it was something, and sometimes something saved you. She sat by the window as the afternoon lowered itself into evening and the city put on its lights. She thought not about forgiveness or strategies but about endurance, the quiet version, the kind that didn't post captions. At 8, an envelope slid under her door. It contained a single page, no letterhead, no stamp. It was a printed summary from the notary packet, the part about third-party emotional interference. Someone had circled the phrase. Below it, in Daniel's hand, 2 words, "Not you." The period looked like a dot pressed through paper, as if he had wanted to break the page. Lydia set the summary next to Graham's card and Daniel's earlier note. She looked at the small stack and saw not evidence in a case but markers on a trail. Outside, a siren moved past without insisting on a story. Inside, the list under the sugar tin still waited, folded and square and wrong. She lifted it, unfolded it, and read each line. Courthouse fee. Photographer. Dress alterations. Dinner. Honeymoon deposit. She took a pen and wrote across the bottom in her own hand, paid in love, in time, in presence. Invoice rejected. She didn't send it to anyone. She just let the ink exist in a room where it had been all numbers. Her phone buzzed again. Not a call. Not a text. A photo from Vera, taken from a scrapbook, Lydia at 27, Daniel at 4, both of them laughing with eyes closed, a blur of motion and grass. Dara had written, "This is your receipt." Lydia smiled and let her breath ease out in a slow, complete line. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding. She heard the sentence that cut and the demand that followed and watched a deeper conflict reveal itself like bruise blooming under skin. She sat in her quiet apartment and allowed the truth to take up the space it needed, no smaller, no larger. The night folded around the building, and somewhere on the 9th floor of another address, a scarf lay over the back of a chair like a flag that would not always declare the same territory. The morning after the envelope slid under her door, Lydia woke before the light and lay still, listening to pipes tick in the walls like a house catching its breath. She replayed the sentence that had started everything, the one that sat in the title of her undoing and kept rethreading itself through every hour. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding. To her shock, the young woman coldly replied, "It already happened yesterday, without you." The mother realized she had been excluded from one of the most important days of her son's life. Days later, the daughter-in-law demanded money and spoke to her with arrogance, revealing a deeper conflict that shattered the family bonds. It had not stopped at a sentence. It had expanded into a system of paper and posture, into brunches and posts and clauses written by someone who liked the sound of doors closing softly. Nora arrived with groceries, the kind of thoughtful invasion Lydia never resented. They shelled peas at the table like 2 women borrowing time from a quieter decade. "He circled not you," Nora said when Lydia showed her the printed summary. That mattered. It meant he had begun naming the shape of the net. "He lived inside it," Lydia said. It didn't look like a net. It looked like a plan with clean edges. She glanced at the painting on the wall and then back at the paper. Clean edges cut. By afternoon, the day carried itself, errands stitched to errands. At the mailbox downstairs, Lydia found a padded envelope addressed in an elegant hand she didn't recognize. Inside lay a silk pouch with a card. The card read, "For safekeeping." The pouch held her mother's apron strings, neatly folded, as if someone had thought symbolism could be shipped. Lydia turned the card over. On the back, in Harper's tidy block letters, another sentence waited: "Some things belong to the past." Lydia held the fabric and felt a burst of absurd laughter rise and then quiet. The apron had belonged to a past that cooked for a future. She set the strings in the drawer with the notes. The drawer had begun to look like a small museum of a family under revision. A knock sounded mid-afternoon, brisk and intentional. Lydia opened the door to find Harper and Vivian flanking a third woman with a clipboard and a ready smile. The third woman wore neutral, the color of "I am not part of the story" made into cloth. "Hello, Lydia," Harper said, every syllable polished. "This is Celine. She facilitated our premarital communication workshop. She specialized in boundary repair. We thought a mediated conversation could be efficient." "Efficient," Lydia repeated, because the word had been following her like a tax form. "In my apartment?" Celine smiled with practiced warmth. "Only if it felt safe," she said, already stepping within the threshold. "My role involved framing things, naming patterns, and redirecting blame back to systems." She moved to the table and placed her clipboard there as if setting an anchor. "I used evidence-based language." Vivian closed the door behind them without asking, a small act that felt like a signature. "We believed you'd appreciate structure," she said. "You sounded so untethered on the phone." Lydia looked at the three of them and thought of Graham's gray jacket, of Daniel's napkin folded carefully by his plate, of the ring polished for photographs, of the claws that turned gifts into destabilizers. She felt the old panic lift and then fall away, replaced by a clarity that sat like a stone in her palm. "We could try structure," she said calmly, "if we agreed on the same foundation. But the building you brought to my door already leaned." She stepped aside, not to invite, but to make space for the truth to move. Celine began with breath counts and ground rules that sounded like gentle edicts. She said statements needed language. She said interruptions coded as disrespect. She said, smiling, that people could own their part. Harper spoke first with flawless "I feel" sentences that somehow circled back to Lydia's alleged intensity. "I felt unsafe when Daniel's phone lit up with 10 texts from you in a row," she said. Lydia remembered 3 texts, a birthday photo, a "call me when you can," a heart. Vivian nodded in metronomic agreement. "Intensity," she echoed softly, as if naming a disease. Lydia kept her voice quiet. "I wrote 3 messages that day," she said. "A photo of him at 4. A sentence. A heart. I counted, because I count when I am careful." Harper pivoted. "I felt excluded from my own life when you spoke to Daniel without including me," she said. "We were a unit." She made the words sound like a fortress disguised as a hug. "You managed to exclude me from my son's wedding while asking me to include you in every future conversation," Lydia said. The sentence landed with a muffled weight. Celine smiled as if someone had performed the exercise correctly and wrote something on her clipboard. Vivian interlaced her fingers and leaned forward. "The ask for contributions had been handled poorly," she allowed, as if tossing a scrap to a stray dog. "We conceded that. But the spirit remained. We all wanted participation. Money simply represented." "Toll," Lydia said, not to interrupt, but to put the right word down where euphemism had begun to grow. Celine's smile became thinner, like a line drawn with a pencil pressed too hard. "Language like toll escalated," she said. "We wanted de-escalation." "We wanted accuracy," Lydia said. Then de-escalation arrived by itself. Harper stood, as if chairs offended her. "We came to offer you a path back into our narrative," she said, the tone almost benevolent. "You kept choosing the role of antagonist. You turned a private ceremony into a referendum. You turned a simple request into a trial. You rejected help." "A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding," Lydia said, the title of her life out loud in the small room. "She heard, it already happened yesterday, without you." Days later, the daughter-in-law demanded money and spoke with arrogance, revealing a deeper conflict that shattered the family bonds. "That was not me turning anything. That was gravity." She let the last word sit. Harper's eyes brightened with a flick of frustration. Consequences existed, she said. We had named them. When boundaries were not respected, access reduced. That had been healthy. You reduced my access to my son, Lydia said. You also reduced his access to himself. She gestured at the table, the sugar tin, the folded invoice that had become a talisman of indecency. You reduced love into math. Daniel's key turned in the lock like a deus ex machina written by necessity rather than convenience. He stepped in, halted at the sight of the tableau, and closed the door behind him slowly, as if not to spook the truth. He took in Celine, Harper's crossed arms, Vivian's poised hands, Lydia's steady posture. He set his keys on the counter, the sound a soft punctuation. I didn't agree to this, he said. His voice carried the fatigue of a man who had said too many agreeable things and had started pulling words back from the wrong mouths. Mom, I'm sorry they came here. I didn't know. He turned to Harper. You said we were going to reframe with brunch. You did this instead. Harper recovered quickly, sliding the polished mask back into place. We adapted, she said. Your mother escalated online with passive-aggressive likes. We needed intervention. Daniel blinked. Passive-aggressive likes, he repeated, and in the repetition came an absurdity that almost made him laugh. He didn't. He moved to the table and put a hand on the chair as if to steady himself. Celine, thank you. We didn't need facilitation today. He didn't look at Vivian. He didn't need to. The architecture of this visit had been transparent. Celine gathered her clipboard with the smoothness of someone who exited politely from skirmishes. I sensed resistance, she said, as if reading a weather report. I honored it. She moved toward the door with a professional smile that had the decency not to be smug. Vivian stood as if pulled by a string, adjusting the cuff of her beige sleeve, making a note to herself in the air. Harper stayed an extra breath, eyes locked on Daniel, measuring, recalculating. Consequences, she said softly, not as a threat but as a habit. We named them. Daniel did not step toward her. He did not step back. You named them, he said. I lived them. He opened the door and waited. The three women went out, Vivian murmuring something about calendars, Celine offering a parting nod. Harper paused, looked at Lydia with a small, sharp smile that asked for a flinch and received none, then left. The door closed. The apartment exhaled. Daniel leaned his forehead against the door for a second, a posture that had belonged to him at 12 and again at 25. He turned and looked at Lydia, not like a man asking permission, but like a person returning from a too bright room. I revoked the power of attorney this morning, he said. I went to the bank. I unlinked the account we set up last week. I didn't ask. I did it. He dropped into the chair. My hand shook so much I signed sloppy, but I signed. Lydia poured water. He drank like a runner between miles. What happened, she asked gently, besides 3 people attempting to turn my kitchen into a seminar? He rubbed his eyes. My boss called me in, he said. He asked if everything was okay at home. He said my performance had dipped. He didn't sound managerial. He sounded human. I said I didn't sleep well. He said, you sound like a man trying to keep peace by giving away pieces. He didn't even know he said a poem. I sat in the bathroom and stared at the hand dryer and thought about a ring, a ledger, a clause. Then I called the bank. He looked up and almost smiled. I didn't ask permission. They ate the peas. They did small dishes. The day gathered itself into evening. Lydia noticed, later, a new text on her phone that had not come through earlier, another technological shrug. It was from Graham. One more thing, it said. Off the record. The template Celine used at workshops, yes, the same Celine, shared language with the management agreement. It was a copy-paste world. Be careful with coaches who sold calm the way jewelers sold light. A week ripened and then bruised. Harper posted photos from a restorative retreat that looked like a brand catalog for linen clothing and stoneware mugs. The caption spoke of releasing old narratives. Vivian hosted a trunk show with champagne and hashtags. Daniel slept some nights at home and some nights on a friend's couch, a man named Kieran who had known him long enough to hold silence when silence mattered. He sent Lydia a text at 2 a.m. that read, "I'm okay," and another at 6 a.m. that read, "I'm not," and both had been true in their hours. Lydia did not post. She did not counter-caption. She did her small work and kept a kettle clean. She wrote a letter to herself that said, "You didn't fail at the thing you were accused of. You failed at being invited to a performance." She tucked it under the sugar tin with the folded invoice, because pastries and truth sometimes shared a container. On Sunday, Vera dragged Lydia to the flea market under the overpass, where people turned their attics into economies. At a table stacked with frames, Lydia found a cheap wooden rectangle that fit the painting exactly. "Buy it," Vera commanded. "Frames are armor." Lydia bought it. At the next table, she found a typewritten page under a stack of sheet music. She read 3 lines and felt a jolt. It had been a poem by a woman no one quoted anymore. "Do not sit too long with hurt/it grew fangs and named you yours." She paid $1 and carried the line home. That afternoon, Harper called. Lydia watched the name appear and let the phone ring 3 times before answering. "Hello," she said. She had decided that hello held enough. Harper sounded composed, as if she had practiced in front of a mirror with the blow dryer on to mimic wind. "We needed to coordinate logistics," she said. "Keys, boxes, access to storage." Daniel had been reactive. He made unilateral decisions regarding accounts. It had been harmful to our stability. "We needed you to return the ring if we separated property cleanly." It had been documented as a gift. Lydia looked at the painting on the wall, the new frame making the leaves look like flames inside a window. "He gifted the ring to you," she said. "I gifted the ring to him." That story remained written. "The ring belonged to my marriage," Harper said, as if the sound of the word marriage could summon a law. "We needed clarity." "What you needed had been leverage," Lydia said. "You built it and then called it clarity." She spoke without heat. Heat had been expensive. She saved it. Harper paused, then deployed the word that had become her tool and her alibi. "Consequences," she said, as if holding a talisman. "Natural consequences existed," Lydia said. "You said artificial ones." She let that sit a second. "Here were mine. I ate alone the night of my son's wedding. I counted the seconds of a voicemail. I paid nothing for a day I was not allowed to stand inside. I slept, eventually. Those had been my consequences. They taught me things." Daniel had been malleable, Harper said, almost rueful. "He shaped to whoever held him." "You held too hard." "I taught him gravity when he fell off a bike," Lydia said. "Gravity held. It didn't ask for an invoice." Harper ended the call with a measured tone that sounded like a closing argument no one had invited her to deliver. Lydia set the phone down and felt not triumph, not loss, but a fatigue that came with hearing a person use words like wire. Evening slid across the window like a slow wave. Daniel knocked, this time with a bag of groceries and a face that looked like it had learned to stop apologizing for being sad. He cooked pasta with too much garlic, the way he always had when left to his own devices, and the apartment smelled like bad first dates and good loneliness. They ate. He handed Lydia 3 envelopes, each with a company logo. "Joint account," he said. "Revoked. Credit card authorized user status. Removed. Power of attorney. Rescinded." He pushed breath out as if he had been holding it for a week. "I didn't ask anyone to approve the revocations. I just did the steps." Lydia placed the envelopes on the table next to the frame receipt, next to the poem, next to the summary with "not you." The small museum in the drawer had overflowed onto the table. "You did adult things," she said. "Not the kind sold in a workshop. The kind done in line at a counter with bad music overhead. He nodded, then looked at her, almost shy. I went by the park, he said. The elm trees still stood. Kids still chased bubbles. I watched a boy fall, scrape his knee, get mad at the world, and then get back on and ride crooked for 10 feet like a champion. I cried, which looked ridiculous on a bench, but no one cared. I texted Kieran that I cried at a kid's bubble and he sent 5 thumbs up, which softened the stupidity. They did dishes again, a ritual that steadied hands. The phone buzzed once more. A message from an unsaved number appeared on Daniel's screen and he did not move to hide it. Lydia read the visible line before he turned it face down. If you stepped outside of our agreement, there needed to be legal remedies. Harper's name sat at the top like a heading on a document. Daniel slid the phone across the table to Lydia, as if to say that secrets belonged elsewhere. She sent that after the bank, he said. She liked legal language. It made feelings look aligned. What did you answer? Lydia asked. Nothing, he said. Silence answered. Then I called a real lawyer who wore scuffed shoes and asked me about feelings first. Which made me trust him against my better judgment. He said most templates collapsed under weather. He said courts smelled intent. He said not to panic. He grinned a little, embarrassed. He also said to eat, which made him my favorite. They ate a slice of bread with butter and laughed at nothing until the laughter turned into air. Late, after Daniel left for Kieran's couch because his own apartment felt like an office rented by a stranger, Lydia stood by the window and watched a plane stitch a thin white seam across the night. She thought about Vivian's boutique and Celine's clipboard and Graham's card and the way words had been repurposed until they meant their opposites. She thought about how a family broke like ceramic, loud, visible, and how it also broke like ice, somewhere underfoot, one crack at a time. 2 days later, the boutique posted an announcement, a collaboration with a new investor to expand a second location. The photo showed Vivian shaking hands with a man in a suit. The caption thanked Family Support Systems. Lydia did the math in her head without trying. She thought of lines on a page, of signatures, of the day before the vows. She did not comment. Her silence had become an instrument rather than a punishment. The call came that evening from an unknown number. A man introduced himself as the investor's assistant. He asked for Daniel. Lydia said he was unavailable. The assistant, relieved by something he didn't say, lowered his voice and asked if Lydia knew whether Mr. F. had consented to serve as an informal guarantor through household assets. He used phrases lit by corporate fluorescence. Lydia said Daniel had rescinded authorizations. The assistant exhaled so close to a sigh it passed for one. Then we needed to recalibrate, he said, a word that sounded like retreat wearing a suit. Our understanding differed from reality. When she hung up, Lydia sat and let the line of cause and effect write itself without her forcing it. A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding and heard that the answer had been yesterday without her. Days later, the daughter-in-law demanded money and spoke with arrogance, and the deeper conflict did not stop at an attitude, it reached into accounts, into agreements, into the scaffolding of a life. It had never been about a day. It had been about who wrote definitions and who signed under them. Night folded itself around the city again. Daniel sent a photo of soup he had made badly and then eaten completely. Vera sent a voice note that said, "I'm proud of you, idiot," and then laughed at herself. Nora texted a picture of the flea market poem taped above her kettle. Graham wrote, "If he needed a witness for anything, call," and then added a period that looked like a small shield. Lydia framed the painting and hung it a little higher. She stood back and looked, the way he had done at 17. The leaves burned inside the wooden rectangle like small truths that survived bad weather. In the hallway, the clock ticked honest seconds. In the drawer, the apron strings lay folded, not as a concession to the past, but as a thread capable of being tied again when necessary. On the table, the envelopes and notes sat like mile markers rather than artifacts. Lydia took a breath that reached her ribs and then another, and then she listened, to the kettle begin to mutter, to her phone vibrate once with a message that did not demand, to the ordinary persistence of a mother who had been written out of a ceremony and had refused to be written out of her own life. In the days after the investor's assistant called, everything that had been implied stepped out into daylight and stood still long enough to be seen. Daniel showed up at noon with a cardboard box and the look of a man who had already done the worst parts alone. He set the box on the floor by the table and pressed his palms flat on the lid as if bracing it against an imaginary wind. Inside lay the ordinary relics of an apartment that had decided to be a negotiation: a half-used jar of saffron someone had given them, a stack of cookbooks with gift inscriptions, a sweater Lydia had knitted in a winter when the city had kept its snow for weeks and everyone learned to walk differently. He took each thing out as if it might explain itself. None of it did. He told her what had happened that morning in simple sentences. He said he had met with the lawyer with scuffed shoes. He said he had filed papers that said the word dissolution in ink that bled slightly on the page where he pressed too hard. He said he had returned the key fob to the front desk and left a note on the counter that read, "I am not the man who signs for quiet anymore." He said he had taken the scarf off the back of the chair and placed it neatly in a bag because even endings deserved neatness. He said Harper had watched him pack and had said, "You were dramatic when you were content and now you were dramatic when you were leaving," and he had answered, "I was quiet both times, and that was the problem." He said Vivian had called to say that adult men did not flee, and he had replied that adult men also did not learn to make themselves small to meet an invoice. He did not say he was brave. He did not need to. They carried the box together to the bedroom and set the sweater on the chair with the soft dent in the cushion where Lydia had always left a book face down. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked around as if measuring the room for something he could not yet name. "I thought I had to make peace by paying for it," he said, the truth finally so clean it almost shone. "I thought I had to choose between the person I loved and the person who raised me, as if love and raising were two teams on a field." A mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding. To her shock, the young woman coldly replied, "It already happened yesterday, without you." The mother realized she had been excluded from one of the most important days of her son's life. Days later, the daughter-in-law demanded money and spoke to her with arrogance, revealing a deeper conflict that shattered the family bonds. "I lived inside that long sentence like a man walking through heavy snow. I had kept trying to shorten it. It wasn't a sentence that asked to be shortened. It asked to be finished." He slept on the couch that night under a blanket that had belonged to Lydia's mother, a blue wool with one mend at the edge where life had caught it once. He ate soup again and several slices of buttered bread because soup and bread had been things a person could accomplish without elegance. He sent a message to Kieran that read simply, "I'm here," and Kieran answered with a heart and a photo of his cat, who had the exact expression of a friend who would neither advise nor leave. In the morning, a padded envelope arrived with a return address that had been scrawled and then crossed out and then written again in tidier letters. Inside lay the ring wrapped in tissue paper printed with tiny gold dots, and a card without a salutation. The card contained 7 words in Harper's tidy block letters, "It never fit the way I imagined." The period at the end looked like an afterthought, a small stone dropped into a pond that refused to ripple. Lydia unfolded the tissue and held the ring. Her mother's ring had traveled from Odessa to this city, from dresser felt to courthouse flash, from caption to envelope. It had returned with a sentence that told a truth about metal without understanding the one about inheritance. Lydia placed the ring on the table and did nothing theatrical. Daniel looked at it and then at her and exhaled as if he had been holding air in his chest since the day he had taken it away. "It always fit you," he said. "Not on a finger." In the story, Graham wrote with a final quiet offering. He said he had submitted a statement about the signing process and had described the pace and the "we rehearsed this, babe" and the way a pen had been guided by a timeline rather than consent. He said the notary office had updated its scripts. He said he had been told to stop editorializing in the margins of his conscience and had said he would try. Lydia sent him a message that said, "Thank you for the part you played," and that was the end of their brief, odd alliance. Celine ran a webinar the following week on de-escalation in families with high-intensity parents, and Lydia received the link from a cousin with a raised eyebrow emoji. Lydia did not click. Vivian hosted the trunk show, shook hands with the investor in a second photo, and then, days later, posted a carefully worded update that said market conditions had encouraged a strategic pause. The caption thanked resilience. Lydia thought how resilience had been a word that did not need thanks when it was real. There had been a family gathering, the messy kind, the kind no one photographed. Vera brought too much food and made jokes that arrived like ambulances, loud, needed. Nora sat by the window and folded napkins obsessively because her hands needed a task when her heart didn't have one. Alina hugged Daniel awkwardly, then less awkwardly, then properly. No one said the word divorce because it did not need to be said to be present. It sat at the end of sentences like a period no one had placed and everyone had agreed to honor. Daniel spoke simply. He said he had signed things he did not believe in because he had believed in someone who sold him the sound of peace. He said he had returned authorizations to his own name. He said he had given up the apartment and the couch and the set of dishes that looked like the moon and had kept his passport and a photograph from when he was 6 and had lost his first tooth and had bled like a hero. He said that a mother asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding and then, when she was told it had happened yesterday without her, refused to pay for the privilege of pretending it had not. He said that he had once thought adulthood was a string of approvals and had learned that it was sometimes exactly the opposite. The ring sat in a small bowl on the kitchen counter for 3 days, neither put away nor declared. On the 4th day, Lydia wrapped it in the original felt and placed it back in the top dresser drawer, not as a relic but as a thing that still carried the story of hands. She did not think of it as triumph. She thought of it as the return of a sentence to the page where it had belonged. She tied her mother's apron strings around a loaf of bread to cool it on the counter, that old practice of keeping crusts from sagging. She taped the flea market poem above the kettle where steam could not touch it, where eyes could. She wrote a new note and placed it under the sugar tin beside the old invoice. This new note contained only 3 words, paid in witness. It did not ask for a response. Daniel found a small studio on a street that smelled like bakeries in the morning and like dust in the afternoon. He took the painting off Lydia's wall long enough to make a careful copy on thick paper, his jaw tightened in concentration the way it had at 17, and then he rehung the original in its frame where the leaves looked like small flames refusing to be blown out by anyone's breath. He took the copy to his studio and hung it crooked and left it crooked, deliberately, as a reminder that alignment had mattered less than honesty. He bought a used bike from a man who had named it Olive and said Daniel could keep the name or give it a better one. Daniel kept Olive. He rode at the park, and when he fell once on a patch of damp leaves he laughed out loud, which startled a woman walking a dog who then laughed back, which was how the world sounded when it forgave a person for being ungraceful. Vivian sent a single message the day the dissolution papers were filed and acknowledged, a text that read, "When you broke patterns, you lost stability. That had been your choice," and attached a link to the boutique's mid-season lookbook as if advertisement could double as wisdom. Daniel answered with a single line, "When I broke patterns, I found my name." He silenced her number. He did not block it. He had learned that silence, applied correctly, was not the same as absence. Harper posted 2 long captions in quick succession that said everything and nothing, about choosing self, about healing, about learning from misaligned attachments, and a final photo of a hand without a ring holding a ceramic mug on a porch somewhere with good light. There were comments that applauded and comments that accused, and none of them mattered where the real things were. Daniel read them once and then not again. He moved his clothes twice in milk crates and once in a borrowed suitcase. He carried his books in a canvas bag Lydia had used for library runs when he was 8. He ate noodles on the floor his first night in the studio and texted Lydia a photo of Olive leaning against a wall that had not yet learned what would hang on it. She replied with the heart and a sentence, "The elm trees still stood." He wrote back, "I rode crooked like a champion." On a Sunday evening that smelled like rain deciding itself, Daniel came over with a paper bag full of things that did not merit the ceremony of a box, the last of the spices, a mug with a chip, the pair of socks that had somehow ended up in the wrong drawer. He placed the bag on the table and then reached into his pocket and took out a folded scrap of paper. He unfolded it and flattened it with his palm. It was a photograph someone had captured at the courthouse that day he had thought was a day, where he had stood with a pen over a line and a plant in the corner had done its best imitation of generosity. He looked at the photo and then held it toward Lydia. "This had been the picture I used to prove to myself that I had participated in my own life," he said, honest enough to hurt. "It turned out it had only proved I stood very still when someone asked me to move." He tore the photo in half, then into quarters. He did not look theatrical. He looked precise. He dropped the pieces into the trash and washed his hands like a man who had touched something that needed exactly that: no scalding, no scrubbing, just water and a small decision. He set the kettle on. Lydia sliced bread. He said, "I booked the community room at the park for Saturday afternoon. I texted Vera and Nora and Alina. I asked Kieran to bring his cat only if the sign said it was allowed." He smiled at his own joke. There were cheap paper plates and 2 sweet lemonade and a playlist someone's teenager had made. I wanted to say words out loud in front of people who had known me since my teeth were too big for my face. He looked at Lydia, not asking. He never had to. "I asked if you could speak because the first sentence we all lived in had started in your doorway and I wanted a different one to sit with us at a table with plastic forks. They did it the way ordinary people did things that mattered. They brought Tupperware and cousins and those folding chairs that pinched skin in the exact same place every time. The elm trees threw shade over a table covered by a paper cloth that had been taped down badly and kept trying to lift like a bird. Kieran set up a speaker that coughed once and then cooperated. Someone's toddler cried and then laughed at bubbles and then cried again in the span of a song. Life happened in its usual out-of-tune orchestra, and that made the notes everyone brought ring truer. Daniel stood up and said what he needed to say without poetry. He said he had been unkind by omission and had carried shame around like an ID card that did not open doors. He said he had believed that a ledger could measure love and had learned it could only measure a person's willingness to pretend love liked ledgers. He said he had signed to buy quiet and had discovered that quiet could not be purchased at all. He thanked people who had brought him soup and couches and texts at midnight that said "still here" without requesting anything in return. He thanked his mother for standing in a doorway and telling the truth without setting fire to anything or to anyone, even when kindling had been everywhere. He said he had begun to live like a person who did not owe serenity to anyone who sent him an invoice. He sat down before anyone could clap because clapping would have made it smaller. Lydia stood and spoke the sentence she had lived inside and then set it down and walked around it until it looked like a thing that had happened rather than a fate. She said a mother had asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding and had heard, "It already happened yesterday, without you." She said days later the daughter-in-law had demanded money and had spoken with arrogance, revealing a deeper conflict that had tried to break things that had been built with years and flour and stitches. She said she had refused to pay for a story she had not been allowed to stand inside. She said she had not vanished. She said she had kept her door unlocked and her words exact. She said she had learned that love for a grown child did not mean always being taken along, it meant refusing to hand over the map to someone who had liked to redraw roads. She thanked the people who had made her laugh at hard hours, who had sent photos of cats, who had taped poems above kettles. She said she had slept, eventually, and that sleeping had been a kind of faith. They ate too much and sent people home with containers. Vera pretended to be offended by the playlist and then danced anyway, which was what Vera had always done with anything that looked like a rule. Nora sat on the grass and taught Alina's daughter how to make a clover chain that would survive being a crown for 3 minutes and then become a necklace lying on a plate and then become part of the park again. The sky pulled clouds across itself like a sheet, loving no one and everyone in the same proportion. At the edge of the afternoon, when plates had been stacked and toddlers had surrendered to gravity and Kieran's cat had remained, properly, at home, Daniel and Lydia walked to the elm trees where he had first learned friction and freedom were part of the same physics. He pointed with his chin. "That was the bench," he said. "I cried there and no one made it an event." They sat for a minute and let the noise decide itself. He took her hand, not the way a child took a hand across a street, but the way an adult accepted a steadying. "I lived inside a sentence and then I wrote a different one," he said softly. You stayed. That changed the ending. She squeezed his hand and said a simple word that belonged to both of them, the way the painting did, the way the ring did, the way the apron did when it tied around something that needed cooling. Yes. Evening carried them home, not like a parade or a retreat, but like what it always had been, a part of the day that arrived and then passed. Lydia placed the ring back in the drawer and closed it without ceremony. Daniel took Olive from the tree and walked the bike beside her because moving slowly together had been the point. In the apartment, the clock ticked honest seconds. The invoices in the drawer remained folded, and the notes remained on top of them like small flags. The painting warmed in the last light as if leaves could hold heat for the room. The kettle muttered and then sang. A mother had asked her daughter-in-law about the date of her son's wedding and had been told, "It already happened yesterday, without you." She had been asked for money to buy back a place and a day already carved from her. She had refused the purchase, endured the arrogance, and listened as the deeper conflict named itself. In the end, the bonds had not shattered, the wrong ones had snapped. The real ones had held.